Wake up, millennials, because I've got a camera for you. Actually, I have two. The Sony A6400 and the Fujifilm X-T30, two very similar cameras, and we're going to pair them head to head and find out which one wins. Actually, spoiler alert, it's a tie. I know, it's a bit of a letdown, isn't it? But not so fast, Commandante, because while some people like avocado on their toast, others just like, jam. Okay, maybe not the best analogy I've ever had, but my point is that we're all different, and we all like different things for different reasons. And so maybe let's call this, which camera are you? And to find out, let's get moving. For the last couple days, I tested both of these cameras in my apartment because of what is quite possibly record snowfall here in Toronto. While some people get sent to San Diego to test cameras, I get stuck in my apartment for 2 days. Needless to say, let's talk about what makes these cameras similar. They both feature an APS-C sensor, whereas the A6400 steals its sensor from its predecessor, the A6300, and comes in at 24.2 megapixels. The X-T30 gets its sensor from its big brother, the X-T30, and that comes in at 26.1 megapixel. It's a negligible amount of resolution difference. I don't think it matters. But let's talk about what does matter. Let's go through all my tests right now. One of the first things I like to test with these cameras is the high ISO low light performance. Now, when it comes to high-end mirrorless cameras or DSLRs, you're often using them in environments where you can bring in lights or faster lenses, and so you don't really need to go above 800 often. But in the particular case where you are a blogger, a travel photographer, a street photographer, you're often using 8, 16, or 32, or even 6400 ISO just to get exposure. And so it becomes even more important that these cameras are fairly good in low light, even though they only cost $1,000. Now, I will tell you that based on my tests and what I've seen, that these cameras both are identically usable up to 6400 ISO, which is astounding because 5 years ago, a $1,000 camera wasn't particularly good after 800 ISO. So we've seen some pretty impressive leaps and bounds and makes these images incredibly useful at 6400. That being said, if you want to see the images fall apart, well, there's a couple ways to do that. You can dive deep in by a high magnification, and you can start to see at a pixel level where the detail falls off and where noise is introduced. You can also sort of misexpose or underexpose your image, and then if you have to, in post, change the contrast or exposure, you're going to bring out a lot of that noise. So this really relies on you accurately exposing your image properly so it's usable straight out of camera. People say, well, both of these cameras can shoot RAW, and that is true, and you are not going to get necessarily the compression noise, but you're still going to get the noise to signal ratio. That's going to remain constant because that's comes straight from the sensor. So the noise is going to be there regardless whether you're shooting JPEG or RAW. Compression noise, maybe not. So the final answer is both these cameras are great. What they both failed at, in my opinion, was that when you get to 800 or 1600 ISO, both cameras really struggled to focus. And if I was to do this test again, I would have locked focus on manual because I didn't really notice this when I'm looking at the back screen. But what was really amazing was that they were losing focus or struggling to get focus when they shouldn't have struggled to get focus, in my opinion, when I just had a simple chart up and I had the focus point right on the chart. So who knows, but my experience was that after 1600 ISO, they both failed in the focus category. Now, speaking of focus, let's move on. Where was I? Oh yes, autofocus. Both of these cameras feature brand new firmware that greatly enhances their intelligent autofocus. And so what I want to do is I really want to challenge these cameras by putting them in a very unideal environment. So let's go back to the low light room. Now in this particular situation, I kept the low light, but I also added a backlight, and then I moved the model forward and backwards along the focal plane and in and out of frame. Now they both perform pretty well, but the Sony shows a significant advantage over Fujifilm here. The model can go in and out of frame and it remembers her. The X-T30, however, is a bit sluggish to regain focus again. Now let's take this to some better and brighter conditions. In the moderately average lighting of my living room, we see pretty much the same results. Both cameras perform pretty well. But once the subject leaves the frame, the X-T30 gets a little confused, while the A6400 remembers the item. Now, this might seem like a clear winner for the A6400, but there's a chance that you might not want it to remember the last thing that it locked onto, in which case you're going to have to go into the camera settings and perhaps start manually guiding it with the focus points or focus area. If you're a beginner, both of these cameras are going to give you very accurate shots almost immediately. And if you're experienced, well, then you can go into the settings and tweak it to your preferences or the environment you're in. But straight out of the box, the A6400 takes the cake. Next up is stability. Neither of these cameras feature an in-body image stabilized sensor, but both manufacturers gave me their cameras with optically stabilized lenses. And so I did leave my apartment for a whopping 2 minutes to brave the storm so that you people can see how stable these cameras are.
Beautiful day for a walk.
Now, the Sony has a SteadyShot on it, which is a bit of a digital stability, whereas the X-T30 does not. The Sony A6400 is known for having really bad rolling shutter, that sort of wobbly image. And you can see it here if you look into the corners of the frame, things get really wobbly, and that's both the rolling shutter and the SteadyShot algorithmically trying to stabilize the footage. When we look over at the X-T30 footage, it looks pretty similar to the A6400, but again, the devil is in the details because like the X-T3, the X-T30 has virtually no rolling shutter, which means that your shaky cam footage is actually going to look more organic and more filmic. And for that reason, the X-T30 is my pick. Next up is one of the key reasons people claim brand loyalty, and that is color science and skin tone rendition. Now, I own a Sony camera. I'm shooting this on the A7 III right now, and I find that Sony can be a bit bipolar. Sometimes I think its skin tones are quite neutral, and other times I think it's a saturated hot mess. For me, the video standard profile seems quite neutral, but the still standard profile seems very hyper-saturated. You can probably dial this down in camera, and I definitely would. Either way, the Fuji seems way more realistic and has way more gradients in the detail. For this test, I even applied the Eterna Cinema profile and gave it a light grade, and both profiles were very pleasing. The Sony skin tone, in comparison, felt a bit flat, lacking a bit of detail. So if the X-T30 ends up being anything like the X-T3, then Fujifilm wins this one, hands down. Next up is one of my favorite subjects to talk about when talking about cameras, which is that if you don't like using your camera, you've just wasted a whole lot of money. And so ergonomics and design. Now, the A6400 feels like a one-handed shooting machine because it borrows its grip from the A6500, whereas the X-T30 doesn't really have any grip to speak of. And I'd be a bit worried that if I wasn't careful, I'd either drop the camera or miss some shots. Now, if compactness wasn't an issue, then the A6400 would win hands down. But there's a few more important things to consider here. Now, first off, of course, is compactness. The X-T20, the X-T30's predecessor, gained a lot of popularity with the travel set because it was really compact, or with photographers who just wanted a really small footprint. So you put a pancake lens on this guy and it virtually fits into your pocket, which is awesome. But that's a minor thing compared to what I think is a much bigger issue, and that is a very clean back and a joystick. Now, on the surface, the A6400 would seem to have better options because you can control your focus points either with the multifunction wheel or with the touchscreen, but neither really felt that good to me. To use the touchscreen, you have to take your hand off the grip, which means that you now lose the security of the grip, and it's really weird to hit the shutter button. The control wheel seems like a great idea because it effectively replaces a joystick, but it's a multifunction wheel, which means it spins and depresses. And if I accidentally spin it while depressing it, I change my aperture, and that got super annoying. I do have one beef with the X-T30, and this one really boggles my mind. It is the Q20 receiver is right next to the battery and SD compartment. So if you're using a tripod or a QR plate, you have to remove that first before you can do a battery or media switch. Now, there's a workaround for this. There's an aftermarket product that you can buy for the X-T10 and 20 that would adapt to this, and it is a bottom plate and hand grip that moves the Q20 over and gives you a slightly beefier hand grip as well. But that's an extra purchase, which you don't want to have to do, obviously, and they could have just moved this over. And then there are the articulating screens. Now, the A6400 is getting a lot of press for its new forward-facing LCD screen. But here's the thing. It's partly obscured by the top of the camera. And if you put a hot shoe mic, as vloggers tend to do, you can no longer see the screen at all. Couple that with a non-optically stabilized lens, and you, sir, have yourself a very hot mess of a vlogging camera. So, neat feature, but definitely not a vlogging camera. Both of these cameras have features that are really great and some design missteps. So I'm gonna call this one a truce. Stop me if this has ever happened to you. You record an entire review video and you start editing and realize you forgot to talk about the one thing that you really wanted to talk about, and that is video functionality. Now, the X-T30 is quite exciting because it shares the same sensor and processor as the X-T3, and the video on the X-T3 is out of this world for a mirrorless camera. Now, one would hope that the X-T30 would have very similar results, and maybe it does, but maybe not. Here's the thing, you can't put a large engine in a small car without making some sort of like modifications. And so what they've done is they've exchanged the H.265 codec for the traditional H.264 codec, The X-T3's maximum bitrate is 400 megabits per second. They've reduced it to 200 megabits, which is still quite impressive in the X-T30. And then they've reduced the recording time. So 4K recording time is down to 10 minutes, and HD recording time is maxed out at 15 minutes. And this is all just so your camera doesn't melt. Now, if you don't want to be limited to that, you can get an external recorder and then record unlimitedly. And as well, you now get the 10-bit 422 codec, not the 8-bit 420. So you get both unlimited record time and a much stronger codec. So maybe with that, you're gonna see just as good video. Who knows? Now, when it comes to the A6400, there's two things to note. One really exciting thing is that they have eliminated the 30-second record time max. It is now unlimited record time, which is fantastic, which means you can just record until your SD card fills up or until your battery dies. Now, in the case of Sony, you're still dealing with these W batteries, which last a hot second. And so there's a good chance your battery will die first. The second thing is Sony seems to have fixed the overheating issue that plagued the A6300, and so now your camera presumably won't shut off or melt. Now, in terms of audio with these cameras, they're both a bit funky. The A6400 does not include an audio out, so there's no way to monitor audio unless, again, you have an external recorder, and then that has an audio out, and you can monitor audio that way. And with the X-T30, there's two ports. There is an audio out, but it's a USB-C. So if you have a USB-C style headphones, then you're ready to go. If you don't, then Fujifilm sells an additional adapter, sort of like an iPhone adapter, that goes USB-C to 3.5 audio for your regular headphones. The same is kind of true with audio in. Audio in is 2.5, and most audio ins, as you know, are likely going to be 3.5. And so again, Fujifilm sells another little adapter that goes from 2.5 to 3.5. Again, these are additional purchases that you have to make if you're going to be doing video and you care about audio, which you should. And that being said, the real winner for me here is the X-T30 with its 200 megabits per second codec and its 10-bit 422 out. You're likely going to get some pretty stellar video with this. As good as the X-T3? I'm not so sure about that, but pretty darn close, and that's pretty exciting. The last thing I want to talk about, which is effectively attached to design, are the menus. Now, ever since Sony released the A7R III, they've updated their menu system. It's been lauded as a much better improvement over their previous shenanigans of a menu system. And I can tell you as an A7 III owner that I got used to Sony's menu pretty quick, and I now know where everything is in the menu, and I don't really have trouble finding anything. But it wasn't until I got to buzz back and forth between the A6400 and the X-T30 that I noticed how much better menu system the X-T30 had. The problem with Sony still exists that they don't bunch things logically together, and so you're going back and forth in the menu system just trying to find these things that you need, where Fujifilm lists them in a very logical and compartmentalized way. So I got what I wanted faster and quicker with the Fuji menus. That being said, it really comes down to personal preference often, but for me, my preference is Fujifilm's menu wins hands down. Well, that's pretty much it, everybody. Now, the question still looms, which camera are you? And obviously, I can't tell you that because both these cameras are so amazing. For $1,200 Canadian, it's really hard to pick apart these two. They represent such a giant leap in technology, especially at the price point. The only way you're really gonna tell which camera's for you is for you to go to your own camera store with an SD card, preferably Vistek if you're Canadian, and get these cameras in your hand, because you're gonna know by using the camera for a few minutes, which feels really right for you, and then take that SD card home and look at the footage. That's really the only way to tell which camera you are. And that's it for us. Thanks so much for watching, guys. Really appreciate the support. I'd love to hear what you have to say about these two cameras, about your experience with these two brands, and anything else that you would love to discuss in our forum. Right in the comment section down below. Give us a thumbs up, subscribe to our channel, find us on the internet. Goodbye, everyone.